It's a real pleasure to be here and to speak with all the mentors today. I've been a mentor myself as well and very much enjoyed the process. And like a lot of people say, you get as much out of being a mentor as you give to the mentee. Now, my topic today is to discuss general lessons of leadership and partnership. And the thing about leadership is 1,000 books have been written on leadership, and there is no absolute right answer. It's just different people's opinions and their own perspectives. And I'm going to share with you mine. And let me start off with this one. It's a quote from Bernard Russell that I particularly like, which is, "Fools and fanatics are always so certain of themselves, but wiser people are full of doubts." And if anything were to sum up my approach to leadership, it is that. It is about fostering the best out of other people and not always insisting that you are correct. So what I'm going to do over the next 20 minutes or so is draw some lessons of leadership with practical experiences from where I learnt them in conflicts and natural disasters around the world. And then let's have an open and question and answer session. As Juliet says, I'm going to just adjust my camera a little bit because it's been bumped while I was preparing. That's a better spot for it. Now, leadership lesson one, from my viewpoint, is this: admit what you don't know. And you'll see this trend coming through each of my leadership lessons. It's about actually sharing your own weaknesses with the people that you lead. Now, what's the story that I have from this? The Pakistan earthquake was one of the things I've been involved in my life. And to give you a sense of how big that was, a magnitude 7.6 earthquake hit over 90 seconds, making 3.5 million people homeless, destroying over 500,000 houses in 56,000 square kilometres of terrain, destroying 8,000 kilometres of road in terrain that went over 20,000 feet in height 6 weeks before a Himalayan winter was about to drop 20 feet of snow on top of everyone, right in the period where they were pre-stockpiling their food for winter. If that's not bad enough, a lot of the terrain was controlled by Lashkar-e-Taiba or the Pakistan Taliban, different Islamic fundamentalist groups. And if that's not enough, running through the middle of that was also the line of control, the internationally recognised ceasefire line between India and Pakistan through the disputed territory of Kashmir. When confronted by this enormous catastrophe, the government of Pakistan would turn to its military, and the Pakistan military is a very, very capable military. I was part of a thing called UNDAC, United Nations Disaster Assessment and Coordination Teams, based in Geneva, and the earthquake hit at about 7:30 in the morning Geneva time. We got the alert, and we're put on an emergency dispatch plane by 11 o'clock that night. We're flying into Islamabad to land to set up an international coordination mechanism to support the government and military of Pakistan in helping the people recover, or the emergency relief, then the recovery from the earthquake. But it's big, 3.5 million people, 56,000 square kilometres of terrain. And in those days, under President Musharraf's rule, that the international community sometimes called a military dictator, but those from Pakistan or India who understand the bureaucratic system left behind by the British, it's very hard to dictate anything in that sort of bureaucracy. But in that community, the military is very proud. And we needed to coordinate with the Pakistan Army. So we got called down to General Headquarters in Rawalpindi, and a meeting was held between the General Headquarters staff, led by a guy named Major General Mohammed Yusuf, who was the Director General of Military Operations, with the generals in charge of logistics, medical, and the air wing on his side of the table. And on our side of the table were different branches of the UN, and I was leading the negotiating process. And we were comparing notes. And very early on in natural disasters, you really don't know what's going on because information has got to flow from the most affected region in some of the difficult terrain, and that often takes weeks before information can fully flow to you. So we're comparing the notes about what we knew and what we didn't know. And picture this. This is an army general in his headquarters, in his operations room, where we were basically circling each other. And then he did the greatest and bravest act of leadership I have ever seen. In front of his own generals, in his operations centre, confronted by a whole bunch of foreigners, he put his head in his hands and he said, "We do not know what to do. It's the bravest act of leadership. And I looked across the table at him and I said, honestly, sir, either do we. But we do have some helicopters. And he looked at us and said, you've got helicopters? And he had the general in charge of helicopters talk to our head of the Humanitarian Air Service. And while they were busy talking about helicopters, I wrote on a piece of paper, sir, this is the biggest challenge of your life, but together we will win. And I folded it over and passed it across the table at him. He unfolded it, smiled, and he said, stop the meeting. We can work with these people. By him opening the door and admitting his weakness, what he didn't know, it allowed us to create a partnership by sharing our weaknesses and supplementing my weaknesses with his strengths and his weaknesses with my strengths, and we were able to bring that team. Sometimes leadership is about admitting what you don't know, not telling people what you do. Leadership lesson 2 also comes out of the Pakistan earthquake. After we got through that first meeting with Director General of Military Operations, Mohammed Yusuf, he said, come back in 48 hours, we're going to have a plan to discuss. We were back in 24 because they accelerated the meeting. And this time, it wasn't the Director General of Military Operations sharing meeting. It was the Vice Chief of General Staff of the Army, the number 2 guy, a guy named General Nadeem Ahmed, an absolutely rolled gold human being. And we went to this meeting and he said, here is what we're going to do. We're going to task UNICEF to do this, UNDP to do this. We're going to task the Red Cross to do this. We're going to task Oxfam to do this. And I'm sitting here as a UN rep knowing NGOs compete before they collaborate. They won't take tasking orders from the military. And I had been in the military myself, so I knew what General Nadeem was doing. He comes from a command and control structure where orders come down from the top. And he's assuming that me, as a representative of the UN, I also have a command and control structure and I can just send the orders down as well. But what people don't understand is there is no command and control structure in the United Nations. In fact, there is no such thing as the United Nations. There's a whole bunch of discoordinated agencies with the letters U and N in front of their name, the fascination of the colour blue, and that's it. They will compete before they collaborate. They have different fundraising mechanisms, different reporting mechanisms, different human resources mechanisms. And most of the emergency workers were being deployed out of Darfur, where the last thing you would do is trust the military. And now he thinks they're going to give a tasking order. Now, it's a logical decision for him to make, but I knew he was making it based on flawed information. I also knew from my military days, don't contradict the general in public. Just don't embarrass the guy. So I looked across at the table at him and I said, hey, sir, do you mind if we have a word alone? And he was smart enough to know what I was about to do. And we went into a little side room. And I said to him, sir, let me tell you a story. When I was a young officer cadet in the Australian Army, side note, what I was actually saying to him is I was an officer, I was in the military, so now we are talking military to military, not Australian UN official to Pakistan Army. Bring that bond, find a way of bringing people together. I said, sir, when I was a young officer cadet in the Australian Army, I was the president of my mess committee. That's telling him I was a top cadet. I had a host of brigadier around, Brigadier Rowe. And I asked him once, I said, sir, what's the worst thing about being a brigadier? And Brigadier Rowe said to me, everyone wants to kiss my ass. No one wants to tell me when I'm wrong. And Nadeem laughed, so I knew he got the point. And I looked at him and I said, so, sir, let me tell you when I think you're wrong. And he said, okay. I said, well, that plan you just outlined won't work. You've assumed that you've got a pyramid command and control structure that will mirror my pyramid and command and control structure, and we just send the orders down. He said, yes, I have assumed that. And I said, well, that's where you're wrong. I'm on top of a dysfunctional organisation. It's been globally set up to be dysfunctional. But I said, sir, we can still achieve your same objective, not by giving tasking orders, but by sharing the problem statement with everyone. Let the NGOs cherry pick the bits of the problem that they want to do, have full transparency with us. That's the only condition. Then we know where the gaps are, and then we backfill the gaps with the Pakistan Army. I said, sir, you can still achieve the same objective, but you've now got to be more diplomat than soldier. You've got to persuade, not command. And he got it straight away, and he was brilliant. We have since been published writing a document that we call Non-Interfering Coordination. You can Google it, Non-Interfering Coordination by General Nadeem Ahmed and Andrew MacLeod, and it shows how we actually did it. And we knew we got it right when an organisation like Oxfam, that loves their independence, once complained that they weren't getting enough direction from the military. And I'm like, beautiful, we've got that right. So leadership lesson 2 is be prepared to be told when you're wrong. Leadership is fostering the environment where people can express their opinion when they think that you're wrong, because the worst thing you want as a leader is when you've made a mistake for people to say, yeah, I knew that was going to happen. So I didn't foster the environment in which you told me before the mistake was going to happen. That's not that person's fault for not speaking up. It's my fault for not fostering the environment where people will speak up. Leadership lesson 3. Again, from the Pakistan earthquake. Believe me, I'm going to go to other parts of the world as well. Leadership lesson 3. No one has the monopoly on good ideas, and no one is always wrong. So listen to everyone. Now, in this earthquake, we had 3.5 million people, most of them above 20,000 feet. They're not going to stockpile their food, and we're trying to figure out how the hell do we shelter them all in place, when probably not. We're going to have to force people down from the mountains into displaced people's camps. They're not going to want to leave. We're probably going to have to do it at the point of a gun. It's going to be really difficult. And at that moment, a 21-year-old volunteer from the local university that was helping us set up the Emergency Coordination Centre came into my office and he said, Andrew, you're not using our brains. And I looked at him and I said, of course I'm not. Someone's got to tell us where to buy pens. Someone's got to tell us where to buy paper. Someone's got to tell us how to get telephones connected, because I don't know any of that in Pakistan. That's what you're here for, is to tell us that. So he said, no, I want you to use our brains. I'm like, okay, Einstein, here's the problem. We've got X number of people above 20,000 feet, 26,000 feet, 20 feet of snow's about to dump on them. I don't know what to do. Go away and solve that problem. The next day he came back and he said, I think I have. And I'm like, really? What? He said, well, the earthquake didn't vaporize houses. It just crushed them. They fell down on themselves. But there's plenty of corrugated iron and there's plenty of wood. What if we talked about just building one warm room to keep people in for the winter, not a whole house? Maybe that's going to be part of the solution. And he said, not only that, there is a guy already doing it. A fellow named Matthew George, an ex-Navy SEAL, is wandering around the mountains showing people how to build a simple A-frame construction out of the rubble of their houses. One warm room. I'm like, my God, that could work. I took it to General Nadim. He said, let's get a couple of helicopters worth of engineers and experiment. We flew up to a couple of villages, showed villagers how to do it, and we created a thing we called Operation Winter Race. And over the next 6 weeks, we built 400,000 emergency shelters based on that design. That was the simple and critical component of the successful earthquake relief. One 21-year-old volunteer who came and said, use my brain. And it's like, listen to everyone. No one has the monopoly on good ideas. No one is always wrong. So foster the environment where ideas will flow. Leadership lesson 4. Teams, objectives, and rules. Again, from the Pakistan earthquake. Now, Australia, we sent a field hospital to Pakistan in support of with about 32 staff, somewhere around about that. Cuba sent 2,500 doctors. Now, say what you like about Cuba, it's a doctor factory and they've got a good health system. Castro lined up 5 747s at Havana Airport and flew 5 747s full of Cuban doctors to Pakistan. But they got off the plane in flip-flops, T-shirts and shorts without tents. Where were they going to live? So I sat down with USAID. Now, anyone that knows global politics knows the Americans and the Cubans don't get on. And American Congress would never do anything to fund something that Cuba was doing. But USAID had access to tents. Cubans needed tents. And Cubans, I wanted doctors, particularly female doctors, going up into the remote areas to keep people alive. So we managed to sit the Cubans down together with the Americans and got the US government to fund the Cuban doctors' tents. Part of the condition was the Pakistan cricket team then had to teach the Cuban doctors how to play cricket so we can introduce cricket into Cuba. But if you focus on what the objective is, then you can build some really unusual teams. And the objective in a natural disaster is relatively easy. We need to keep 3.5 million people alive, full stop. So any idea that comes up Is it more or less likely to keep 3.5 million people alive? And by focusing on that objective and not all of the extracurricular stuff that's going around, like geopolitics between Cuba and the United States, you can build some incredible and some unusual teams. In this case, USAID and Cuban doctors. So focus on the objective. Be very clear about the rules that you set about openness. Leaders facilitate teams. They don't necessarily control teams. Leadership lesson 5, know what is right. This one doesn't come from Pakistan. This now comes from Rwanda. And it comes from Paul Kagame. Paul Kagame is now president of Rwanda, but back when I was speaking with him, he was the vice president and he was still the general in charge of the military. And he and I got on quite well. We played billiards in the Rwandan Army Officers' Mess. And on my last day in Rwanda, I went in to see him after being there nearly 2 years. And I said, hey, sir, what do you want to do with Rwanda? He said, I want reconciliation between the Hutus and the Tutsis. And I said, oh, cut that crap, sir. Don't give me the political answer. What do you really want to do with Rwanda? He said, Andrew, you keep forgetting something. There wasn't one genocide. There have been 3 this century, 1959, 1972, 1994. In fact, Kagame himself is a survivor of the 1959 genocide. He said, if I don't get reconciliation between the Hutus and the Tutsis, there will be a 4th genocide and my children will die. Sold. He had the right motivation. We can chat for a long time on the pros and cons of his leadership of Rwanda. But to see where it's gone from 1994, unambiguously the worst country in the world, to where it is today, and I've just recently been in Rwanda, it's an astonishing change. Certainly an incredible cementing of peace so far. And his motivation was right, and his motivation was really, really simple. I don't want a 4th genocide, and I don't want my children to die. Leadership lesson 6. Sometimes leadership is choosing the least bad of bad options. When you are confronted by a good option and a bad option, really bloody simple. Take the good option. That's not what leadership is. Leadership is you've got 2 bad options and you've got to have the right ethical and moral framework to determine which is the least bad of those bad options. And the lesson I'll give you this time is from Bosnia. Those of you who remember the Bosnian War know it was a pretty brutal conflict pitting Serb against Croat against Muslim. And near the end of the war, during Operations Flash and Storm, there was some fairly desperate ethnic cleansing going on in all sides. And I won't put a label on it. I won't say whether it was Serb, Croat or Muslim because it really didn't matter. They were all ethnically cleansing it to different degrees or another. Let's call it ethnic group A, ethnic group B and ethnic group C. So sitting on top of a hill, ethnic group A military commander comes up and says, see that village down there with ethnic group B in it? We're going to ethnically cleanse it. Can you please bust the people out? And as a Red Cross delegate, you're like, well, that's not a good idea. I'm not going to help them bust the people out because then I'm going to be the tool of ethnic cleansing. But if I don't, he's then going to send the military down and shoot a few people to make the rest run away. That's not a good idea either. So what is your ethical framework? Do you help the people by busting them out so they're not shot? But then you become the tool of ethnic cleansing, and no doubt CNN and BBC will say that worldwide, and that perhaps could block you from humanitarian operations in other parts of the world? Or do you say no and let the Serb commander go ahead and kill people? Oh, let go who the ethnic group then was. Sorry about that. The point is there's no third way. You can sit down and you can theorise about, well, maybe you can negotiate this, maybe you can negotiate that. No, the commander's going to go down the hill in the next half an hour. You either bust the people out or he shoots them. You've got to make your decision. Now, that is either busting them out, bad idea because it destroys the reputation of your agency, letting them kill the people, bad idea as well. And you've got to have the right ethical framework to be able to determine in your mind, how do you choose the least bad of bad options? And it reminds me of the old saying in international affairs, if the answer seems simple, then it's probably not the answer. Let's go to the Gulf War, for example. People said, no blood for oil. We shouldn't go into the Gulf War. Like, it really wasn't about oil, that war. It was much more complicated than that. But let's boil it down to what was ethically the right or the wrong decision. Going to war, bad idea. Destabilising Iraq, bad idea. But if we didn't do that, the option was to keep Saddam Hussein in power, where he raped and murdered and tortured his own people. Bad idea as well. And we can debate that one for a long time. Which was the least bad of bad options? So that is leadership lesson 6. Sometimes leadership, in fact, very often, leadership is choosing the least bad of bad options. So you've got to have the right ethical and moral framework in your mind where you choose which of the options you're going to take, knowing that everybody you know will tell you you had a bad option. And you did. It's just the least bad of the ones that were in front of you. Leadership lesson 7. Sometimes just do it. Let me go back to Pakistan again. 3.5 million people homeless 6 weeks before a Himalayan winter is due to set in. What do? Well, the worst thing is what's called paralysis by analysis. Doing nothing because you want more information. You want more information. No. Sometimes you just operate on the limited information that you have. Sometimes just do it. However, one of the other critical elements is check and adjust. Operate on the information you have, operate on the best assumptions at the time, but be brave enough to check and adjust your strategy. Going back to General Nadim, who I told you about earlier, building the environment around him in which he could be told he was wrong, would start every morning meeting at the beginning of the earthquake relief with check and adjust, what happened overnight to change our assumptions from yesterday that will change our plan today. In other words, the meeting started with the invitation to say the plan he agreed on yesterday was wrong and needed to change. That was the opening gambit every meeting. What happened overnight that will cause us to change the plan? Even if it was just the arrival of new information about something that happened last week that we didn't know about yesterday, but we now know about today. Creating that environment. No paralysis by analysis. Just do it, but check and adjust as new information comes in. And then leadership lesson 8. And this is probably the most important one to adapt across all of your leadership circumstances, and that is adapt your methodology. In general terms, I say there are 3 types of leadership. There is the military style, leadership from in front. You know, when the officer is at front saying, come on, boys, because it's often men, come on, boys, follow me. Leadership from in front. Then there is leadership from beside, where you build your team up and you say, come on, everyone, let's go together. And then there's leadership from behind. Empower someone, give them the ability, give them the freedom to make mistakes, delegate down to them. Well, which is better? Leadership from in front, leadership from beside, or leadership from behind? Truth is, each of those can apply in different circumstances to different people. In emergencies, leadership from in front often happens first. But as things evolve, you might need to be more leadership from beside or leadership from behind, or different individuals within your team. Some love to be led from the front. Some love to be empowered from behind. The truth is, a good leader will adapt the methodology. Leadership from in front, leadership from beside, leadership from behind, depending on the circumstances and the individual within the team, which means on any given day, you could be leading one of your team members one way and leading another of your team members through a different methodology because that team member is better adjusted. To do that properly, you need to understand each of your team members. How old are they? Are they married? Are they single? Are they kids? Is the pet dog all right? Did the dog just die? How's the children's homework going? All of these sorts of things impact upon people's ability to be able to deliver at work, and you need to know that. So someone who might be very good at being led from behind, that you're used to empowering, where delegation is really good and that person thrives, if his pet dog has just died and he's been counselling his children all night, he might be coming in the next day completely exhausted, and that day he might need leadership from in front. So that is really the trickiest and the hardest bit, which is how to adapt your methodology to each circumstance and each person all the time. So they're the 8 lessons. Leadership 1, lesson 1, admit what you don't know. Leadership lesson 2, set the environment where you are told when you're wrong. Leadership lesson 3, no one has the monopoly on good ideas and no one is always wrong, so listen to everyone. Leadership lesson 4, create teams by clear objectives and clear rules. Leadership lesson 5, know what's right. Leadership lesson 6, leadership is about choosing the least bad of bad options, so having the right ethical and moral framework to determine that. Leadership lesson 7, no paralysis by analysis. Sometimes just do it. And leadership lesson 8, adjust your methodology to the circumstances and the people all the time. That's my take on leadership. That's my take based on my experiences. There's another expression that I like. It's sometimes said to be a prayer, sometimes an expression. That is, give me the strength to change the things I can, the serenity to leave the things I can't, and the wisdom to know the difference. In fact, I live by that on issues big or small. Can I change it? If I can change it, change it. If I can't change it, adapt. Don't sweat to it. Can we change the fact that a virus is happening? Answer, no. Okay, so we accept that. Can we change the fact that there are lockdowns going on? No. So accept that. What can we change? Little things, wash our hands, social distancing and all of that, or the other issues in our life. Don't sweat the stuff you can't change. Sweat the stuff you can change. That's a really good approach to life in general, not just life, not just leadership. So when we look at the virus, it's like, which is the part that you can adjust and which is the part that you can change? I was talking to my friend about this the other day, who just happens to be the Australian Health Minister. So the question about which bit can he change is a lot bigger than the bit that I can change. So his worries are higher. But in circumstances like now, I would say really concentrate on that thing that you can impact and don't sweat the stuff that you can't. The second thing I would say is you've got to plan for multiple options. Like right now, as of right now in today, are we coming out of the virus or are we about to go into a big second wave? We don't know. We don't know. So one of the things as a leader or a planner or even in life is you need to say, well, if we are coming out of it, option A. And if we're going into a second wave, option B. And you've got to start planning for both of those. And mentally, if you can get yourself into the position where I'm well planned if it's option A and I'm well planned if it's option B, so I'm actually ambivalent as to which one comes, then it doesn't matter. You're prepared and you just go down that route. The trick is, in difficult times, you've got to de-stress and de-panic the circumstance in which you're facing, which is by concentrating on only those things you can change. It doesn't really, because risk is always there. Risk is a funny word because risk describes a circumstance in which there's going to be a change. People often view risk through a negative lens, but there is positive risk and there's negative risk. Let's take the sports team. Your sports team goes and plays, just say you like football. Your football team is going out to play. There's a risk they're going to lose and there's a risk they're going to win. There's a positive risk and there's a negative risk. Life is full of risk. There's never a risk-free day. There's opportunities that come from risk all the time. If you were brave enough to buy stocks in British Airways parent company IAG 2 days ago, you've just made 30% on your money in 2 days. That's a positive risk. It could have gone down 5 or 10, but there is a risk. So it's understanding what that risk is. It's understanding which bit's positive risk, which bit's a negative risk, and balancing up what your risk tolerance is and what you're prepared to do. Now, I know what's happened to the stock price because I'm watching it, because I'm wondering about whether I will go and invest in IAG, but my risk tolerance isn't there yet. So it's about understanding positive and negative risk, what your risk tolerance is, what your role is when you engage. And does the coronavirus change that? No, it actually doesn't. It's I've been saying to some friends for about 2.5 years now, I was concerned at the optimism of the global economy. I'm like, something's going to happen in the next couple of years. I don't know what it is. Something's going to happen. I didn't predict the coronavirus, but when it came along, it's like, well, this is it then, isn't it? Something's happened. So now we adjust, because can I impact on it? No. So I look at what's happening in my life and I go, well, what do I do? Now, for example, when the coronavirus hit, I was living in London. I'm now in Australia. Why? Because I made a calculation of a number of things. Who would ever have thought that getting on a plane from London to Australia would be a difficult thing to do? But that was predictable from January. I cancelled my trip to Cote d'Ivoire, started to think about where I wanted to locate myself. I was looking at the British government response based on some of the science King's College was sending them. Wasn't happy with their response. I was looking at the Australian response, was happy with theirs, added it all up. Yep, I'm going to buckle down into Australia for this. Now, the consequence of that for my lifestyle, I travel a lot, not at the moment. And there's one thing for sure, that the British borders will open before the Australian borders do, because Australia is going to be a lot more cautious about it, which means by choosing to come here, it's hindering my travelling lifestyle a lot more than if I had have stayed in Britain. But by coming here, I'm healthier and safer, and more importantly, closer to the older members of my family and friends in case something did go wrong here. So you're compromising. If I choose option A, this happens. If I choose option B, that happens. And if you make these compromises in life and look at these balance of risk consciously, then you can be quite happy with the outcome, because at the end of the day, you say whether it worked or didn't work, I decided it, I did it, and I take responsibility for my own decisions. So it doesn't change my view on risk at all. It's just a little bit bigger. The answer to that's going to be very complicated and mixed, and it's going to be yes and no. I said back in January, what I'm about to express, let me make this clear, this is my personal opinion, and it is not any of the organisations that I work for. But back in January, I did say to a friend, I don't quite understand why the WHO is being so pro-China. Now, let's be clear, if I was an American, I would never vote for Donald Trump. And I don't agree with his decision to cut the funding to WHO. But I was expressing back in January a deep scepticism to my friends about how positive WHO was being about China. But WHO isn't there to do what a lot of people are now saying it is, like to be in control of the pandemic. It's like, no, that's not what its role is. Its role is to advise governments and share information as best it can. It doesn't have an investigation arm to go in and say, is what China telling me true or not? Its role is to be able to transmit the information expressed by China to other countries. And to be honest, other than the first week or two where China was keeping the outbreak secret, they've been pretty open since then, sharing the genome of the virus and the way scientists are working together. So when you look at our international institutions working, there's some skepticism about some of it. Some elements of it are working really well. Some elements of it are not working very well. There's going to be a lot of examination of the EU about whether it did or didn't support Italy well enough, how the EU is going to respond to border controls and economic stimulus at the end of this. Let's see. So I think, to Elizabeth's question, it's going to be mixed. Some things have worked well, some haven't worked well, some organisations have worked better than others, and it's going to be very important at the end of all of this to do very good after-action examinations to see how we can improve. Remember, all of these organisations are run by people, and there's not a perfect human being anywhere. Very good question. You've got to become familiar with team members very quickly. And to do that, you've got to be able to foster the environment where you're going to be told that you're wrong and admit what you don't know very quickly and create that tone. And in creating that tone, it helps you then ask each of the team members about them and what sort of leadership style they prefer. You don't have to guess. You can ask and you can adapt as you go. But it is about having the emotional intelligence to be able to learn and understand each of your team members very, very quickly. But I do find whenever I do get new teams, and in very many of my circumstances, I haven't got to choose the team members, they're just being given to me, that I stand up and say, here is my leadership style. This is what I look for in my teams. And I do like being told that I'm wrong. And depending on the culture of where people come from, it actually takes some time for people to believe you. And I actually find that you need the first screw up where you don't get angry at a team member before people start to believe you. It's a journey without an endpoint. You never stop learning and you never stop adjusting. One of the lessons of leadership, lesson number 4, setting clear objectives. If you combine 4 and 8, it kind of answers that question. I have clear objectives and I'm adjusting my methodology to each individual, then that gives me the tool to be able to ongoing refine and adjust for each individual team members based on the objectives that are set. So there's the team objective, this is what we're trying to do, and you as a team member, here is your objective within that, and here are the incremental steps that you've got to achieve. People like clarity. People like clarity on what they're supposed to do. People like clarity on how they're going to be held to account. If you put that clarity in there and keep people focused on the vision and be emotionally intelligent to see how they're achieving it, then you adjust their methodology each time. And you find that you might start with leadership from behind and someone's not performing and you might need to step in from leadership from in front for a while. And sometimes at the end of the day, you're the boss. And if they aren't delivering hard enough, sometimes you need to step in and be the controlling boss, but just not all the time with everyone. They all are, and that's going to be different from circumstance to circumstance. I mean, in an emergency earthquake hit, speed, really bloody important. Really important. But resilience feeds in too, because you've still got to be standing a week later. You know, you can't be working 23 and a half hours every day. I'll give you a good story. Many of the viewers to this will know of Lise Doucette, the head international journalist at BBC, and she's a wonderful, wonderful woman. And she interviewed me very early on in the Pakistan earthquake relief. And then for the next couple of weeks, she'd ring me every couple of days and she would say, Andrew, I don't want to interview you. I just want to ask you 2 questions. I said, yeah, what's that, Liz? She said, are you getting enough food and are you getting enough sleep? She was actually worried about me as a human being. And she's right, because at the early stage, we needed the speed, but I needed the personal resilience too, because there's no point falling over halfway through the job being done. And then because you're not having paralysis by analysis and you're checking and adjusting each day, you need that adaptability to go through. So the answer is, which of those 3 is more important? No, you need all 3. It's very individual because people's ethics and values are based on their own upbringing, their approach to religion, their approach to education, their cultural background. I'll give you a side story to show the difference. So I used to be a competitive swimmer. And I volunteer for the national swim teams in every country I've been operating in. So I was assistant national coach of the Pakistan swim team for a while. And for the first time in Pakistan's history, we got the female team swimming in the same pool at the same time as the male team. It's just that the males were in lane 1 and 2 and the females were in lane 7 and 8. And one of my staff members was fairly conservative Islamic man, and he was very angry at me. And we were taking a UN flight from Islamabad over to Kabul one day, and we were arguing about this in the plane all the way over. And I said to him, Hamza, you've just had a daughter. Your wife's just had a daughter. If she grows up and has this enormously great talent in swimming, wouldn't you want her to win a medal at the Olympics? To which he said, no, because I wouldn't want to rob from her the freedom to go to paradise. Now, I'm an atheist, but I'm not going to tell him he's wrong about his belief in God. He holds his belief in God, and I respect that belief in God. I don't agree with it, but I respect it. And he strongly views the best thing for his daughter is this code of conduct that is fairly consistent with many people who live in the Islamic world, countries around the world. And again, I'm not going to tell him where he's wrong on that. But my ethical framework would say it's not a problem to be sitting in a wet lycra and having a billion people around the world looking at you in your wet lycra as you win a gold medal in the Olympics. For him, his ethical framework is that's the worst thing for a father to do, because what's more important, your life on earth today or your life in paradise for all of eternity? That's just an example to say how different people's ethics and different people's background will create a different framework, which is why I say in that lesson, you've got to have the ethical framework where you're comfortable with the decisions that you make. Not anybody else. It's yours. Well, it depends on who's in charge then, isn't it? And I believe in transparency. If you make a decision that one of your team members disagrees with ethically, you say, look, I respect your view, but I'm taking the decision for this reason. I'll give you another example, right? During the earthquake relief, there's a lot of ad hoc internally displaced people's camps set up. And in one of them, a disabled woman was chained to a stake Now, there's a stake in the middle of this displaced persons camp, and the chain was 10, 20 metres or something like that. She could roam around a small amount. And one of the international NGOs came in and said, this is abhorrent, this is terrible, why are you allowing this to happen? I said, where is it? And she told me where. And I said, because that displaced person's village is on top of a cliff. That intellectually disabled person, there's no family members around her. Have a look at what's happening in that displaced person's camp. Everyone there is making sure she's got shelter and she's got food. But they're also making sure she doesn't wander over to the cliff edge and fall off. Mm. So when you suddenly look through things through more information or a different cultural paradigm, you sit back and say, is she warm? Yep. Is she dry? Yep. Is she being fed? Yep. Is she alive? Yep. Is this a temporary thing? Yep. What's your problem? Oh, but she doesn't have freedom. It's like, this is not a time to have that argument. Mm. Or another example, near the end of the second winter after the earthquake, we started to forcibly close displaced people's camps. And again, some of the human rights advocacy NGOs got very upset at us. And they came and said, you've got to keep those camps open, Andrew. And I said, A displaced person's camp must always be survivable but never be comfortable. And they said, what do you mean? I said, the moment you make it comfortable, people stay. They don't go home. And if they don't go home, they don't restart their lives. And if they don't restart their lives, you create the cycle of dependency. So, yeah, I'm forcing the camp to close. And they say, you're an evil bastard. I was like, not in the long term, I'm not, because these people are going to go home, they're going to restart their lifestyles, and that's what we want people to do. Displaced persons camps must be survivable, but must never be comfortable. It is about taking tough choices. It really is. And there will be people on this call now that will be sitting there going, I don't agree with that. And I'm like, fine. But that's the decision I made, and this is the reason I made that decision, and I'm comfortable with that. And if you make a different decision, you've got to be comfortable with it too. But you've also got to know what the framework is so you can justify it. Let's call it anti-narcissism. You know, recognise you're not going to make every right decision all the time, and no one is perfect. You know, it's only a real narcissist will allow a setback to be a setback. A really confident leader will look at the setback, and you know the old saying, you learn more from your failures than you do from your successes. Look at the setback, learn from it. Why didn't it work? What mistake did you make? If you don't sit down and look at the mistake you make, you'll repeat it again and again. The tired old phrase, he who forgets the past will repeat it. It's like, we all make mistakes. I made plenty of them. Just learn from it. And there's another expression I sometimes use. Every screw-up is an opportunity to learn. So get excited by it. Yeah, I'd say to them, life is good, much better than the alternative. You are going to have setbacks. Things are going to go well. Things are going to go badly at different times in your life. But at the end of the day, life is a journey that's exciting if you allow it to be. If you look at every success as, wow, that was great, let me learn from it, fantastic. And every failure, oh, great, I've got another opportunity to learn. The coronavirus has hit, I'm leaving London. Awesome, I get to go back to Australia for a while. You know, you've got to force yourself sometimes to always look for the optimistic side. Sometimes there isn't one, you know, but there's still a learning opportunity. Like when I stood in Nyatsarama Church, south of Kigali, with 3,500 rotting human corpses at my feet. It's like, I don't see an optimism there. In fact, it's the moment I became an atheist, not an agnostic, because to my mind, my personal view is, to me, at that moment, my brain said, God fails the logical test. You know, there's a baby's head on the top of all of these bodies. And I said, if God is all-powerful, he can't be benevolent. And if he's benevolent and this happened, then he can't be all-powerful. So that's my personal viewpoint, where I went into one of the worst circumstances I could ever see with that many bodies around my feet, but took a critical life lesson and learning from it, which I enjoyed in a bizarre way, because it gave me a sense of clarity. So even the worst things that happen to you give you an opportunity to learn and an opportunity to test your resilience, because you don't know how strong you are until you've faced difficult circumstances. So when you're facing difficult circumstances, you say, right, how do we get through this? And this is something that I've learned as I've got older. There's always an end. You know, the bad thing ends. So push through it. It's like a very simple level. I'm trying to get fit during lockdown. I'm doing a 5K run each day as a 53-year-old. It's nuts. And at about the 2K mark, my body keeps saying to me, time to stop. And mentally I go, now it's 100% mental. And I know it's going to be finished. I've got 14 more minutes to go. Let's push through it. Let's get to the other end. It will finish. And at the end of it, you're like, that was good. And that is a way I would say to mentees to approach life. You're going to have ups and you're going to have downs. At the down point, you're going to get through it. When you have up points, enjoy it, but you're also going to get through that too. So you've got to find another up point. Take an optimistic view. Life is good, much better than the alternative.